I actively drink other people's coffee to really look at where the market is, and I expect our, roasters to cut with someone else's coffee on the table all the time. And
Oh,
so,
really? Nice.
yeah, it's really important to have, something that isn't yours on the table. And that's a whole nother discussion. But the thing is that like there's such bad coffee out there,
Yeah.
um, that, it's a terrible thing to talk about, how great the Melbourne coffee scene is and stuff like that when, um, Melbourne is really price driven. The market in wholesale is very price driven, and people are adapting to that by not buying such great coffee.
If you're starting or growing your business in these volatile times in coffee and you need a little extra support, our scope of business advisory services may be just what you need. Join one of our hugely successful mastermind groups for support in a group setting, or send us an email to discuss our one-on-one consulting and business advisory services, where we'll work with you one-on-one to solve specific problems in your coffee business. All our services come with a 100% money-back guarantee, so send us an email at support@mapperforward.org and let us know how we can help you today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 3 of a 5-part series with Mark Dundon from 7 Seeds, and we're talking about the difference between opening a cafe today versus pre-COVID. And in this episode, we're talking about the coffee crisis. What are the challenges that roasters face in a year like 2025 with the coffee crisis? And I'm really interested to know where Mark thinks this is going to be and how this is going to impact the industry over the next 5 years. Mark, do you think that the coffee industry is in crisis?
Um, yes, crisis is probably a good word. I think, it's a big shift and change, and I think it's causing people to be fairly anxious. I think it's causing the media to probably overhype it, but I think there's issues at a producer level, all the way through the chain, back down to, even the consumer, with pricing and things like that. So, like, I don't want to overblow it. Like, I think it's been overblown in the media quite a bit. Like, it's something we can navigate, but I think it's something that really requires a lot of, yeah, good thinking and approach, good skills.
I was saying this to you before before we started recording the podcast about how I had a conversation with George and I had a conversation with you, and I was thinking, like, what's the disconnect? Why are these guys, yes, there's a crisis, but yes, it's going to be all okay. Whereas a lot of people are thinking we're in a crisis and I'm not sure that it's going to be all okay. And folks, this is an important thing for people to understand. When you've treated people well, you've paid your bills on time, you've built relationships, you have put in the work over an extended period of time, a crisis is manageable. When you've learnt how to be adaptive, when you've learnt how to solve problems, when you've navigated challenges before, a crisis is less, I guess, threatening to your business. But if you have treated people bad and you haven't paid your bills on time and you haven't got an established history in the business, this is pretty scary for a lot of people. Would you agree, Mark?
I think, look, definitely. I think it's scary for everyone. Like, I think, there's a lot of moving parts at the moment from, price changing, instability, those sort of aspects are very daunting. For us, I think, examples for us is that as we started, like, for us, we have to buy coffee, from our own cash supply. So to change from, paying, 160K to, a container to maybe 210, it's 50K for
That's
us
a
to
big deal.
really,
That's a big
yeah. And
deal.
like, but yeah, it is. And, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to a coffee supply for us for a year. So it's a fairly big change in the dynamics, especially when you self-fund it, when you have to fund it yourself. The banks really aren't really that interested, or if anyone particularly is, the interest rate's going to kill you anyway. So
Yeah.
those sort of changes are what we're battling with a little bit at the moment. For us, it's really looking at achieving supply, maintaining quality. Like, we really want to buy great coffee. We can't compete, at a level on cost because, roasters out there with 500 kilo roasters can brew, put a kilo through a lot cheaper than what we can. What we can do is, as I said earlier, curate our coffee and really provide a format which appeals to, a small, maybe a small population, but enough to maintain our business. We're really looking for that sort of demographic that values what we're putting out. For certain sectors, like, for people who are at a base level with a lot of machinery outlay and things like that, as a roaster, I think that's really difficult to navigate when you have to put your prices up. A lot of people buying, at the C level and then this increase are going to have to pay a lot more, double, for their green value, coffee and things like that. And I think that's huge. They're going to face a lot more difficulty than what we are. Producer level, I think it's really difficult. A lot of roasters are trying to look at new origins or cheaper origins or areas that they probably haven't traditionally sourced from before. So I think a lot of relationships are being broken a little bit, which is unfortunate. I think, also costs just rising across the board, not coffee, but just, cost of living crisis and those sort of aspects make it difficult as well. Less people coming in to a cafe, or, your fuel at the farm and, fertilizer's gone up so much, all those aspects are sort of creating a little bit of a perfect storm as well. Yeah.
Do you think, well, let me ask it different. When it comes to the supply of coffee into Australia, I'm hearing a lot of importers talking about how stressed they are getting coffee into their warehouses. And then when it's in their warehouses, they're having a challenge being able to get their B2B accounts to understand the new dynamics in what's happening. Are you guys, do you have a B2B program?
Can you just explain, like, what, a business to business?
Like a wholesale program. Do you guys do wholesale?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. For us, it's really difficult to, like, we're quite open about, our approach. Like, recently, we just won't incorporate a machine cost into, like, we don't really do machinery, but, a lot of people at the moment are looking at machinery options. There's a lot of change and things like that in, the market. And, like, we just don't do that. Like, it's like, here's the price for coffee. It's $38 a kilo, Australian. It's going to cost you, $250 a week to, lease that, whatever. And, like, if you do 15 kilos, great, but it's still going to be $250 a week to, have that machinery cost. So, for us, we've found that model just doesn't quite add up in this day and age. Obviously not a lot of people are taking that up, but I think it's indicative of some of the, problems out there with
the dynamics.
Like, our wholesale approach is, I suppose, really to look at trying to support people on who really enjoy our product and who are going to extend that product out into the retail world. And we really want to build a platform for them to make great coffee. That's what we want to do. Is we want to support them as well in regards to, making their business model work, because people are going to come back for that coffee. So, yeah.
Yeah. You introduced me to the term when you came on the podcast a few years ago. You introduced me to the term race to the bottom.
Yeah.
And it really got me looking at these dynamics. I observed it everywhere around me. At the time I was living in America, we saw it everywhere in America. We saw it everywhere in Australia. And in a year like 2025, that's something that I've often wondered how those folks are doing, the people who participated in the race to the bottom. Can you help people understand what race to the bottom means, first of all, and then we can start looking at that, how that's impacting the industry at the moment?
Well, the race to the bottom, like, for me, was sort of cloaked in, the specialty terminology a little bit. Like, I'm a specialty coffee roaster, but, like, my best friend at the Green Coffee Company is telling me you're buying, 3-year-old, coffee. what's the real? So, a lot of people were buying, and as like even if you look at what people are doing with coffee and disclosing and things like that, you can see, that some of the coffee is pretty bad. Like
Yeah.
I actively drink other people's coffee to really look at where the market is, and I expect our, roasters to cut with someone else's coffee on the table all the time. And
Oh,
so,
really? Nice.
yeah, it's really important to have, something that isn't yours on the table. And that's a whole nother discussion. But the thing is that like there's such bad coffee out there,
Yeah.
that, it's a terrible thing to talk about, how great the Melbourne coffee scene is and stuff like that when, um, Melbourne is really price driven. The market in wholesale is very price driven, and people are adapting to that by not buying such great coffee.
Yeah, and there was this kind of predatory element to the race to the bottom that went along with this idea of like chasing the bottom of the barrel. This undercutting of roasters where someone would go in with they'd go to a wholesale account, they would say, we have the same coffee and we can offer it to you for a cheaper price. So there was this kind of switching that was happening. And then someone else would come into the same account and say, we can sell it even cheaper. So they'd switch again. And there was this lack of, I guess, stability and loyalty to the roasters that you were using. And that was really prevalent in Sydney, Melbourne, LA, like a lot of the places that we've worked and owned businesses. How does that work today? How do you think that fares in a year that's a coffee crisis, do you think?
It's an interesting dynamic. Where do I start with this really? Like, like there is a dynamic where bigger roasters, like bigger companies, that have been purchased or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
sort of have an advantage because of their size and those sort of aspects. I've been told twice that, I'm going to get devoured because I just don't have the capital backup and all that sort of stuff. But that just makes me more determined to really
Yeah,
push what
fuck
I
off to
do.
anyone who's
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
that.
But the reality is, like, you're looking at big roasters who are automating, going to automation, and really
Yeah.
looking at, costs of green coming in. Like anyone who's been purchased or whatever understands that usually the business model is to make things cheaper, and return profits to the people who've invested in the company. And usually, upwards from 7% to wherever else. And if you look at, a business model based on that, usually you have to change, a solid, especially, coffee companies dynamic a little bit.
Mm.
To me, I think we really need to look at, adaptation, but really, it would be great to have some sort of standards in place. There is, everyone feels a little bit the same about really wanting to form, something that would work as, you know, a group of friends in the coffee industry or, you know, um, and that would be great. It's very difficult to, obviously start anything like that, but I do feel at the moment that it's sort of needed, to just
Hmm.
put some sort of, um, yeah, even if it's informal to a certain extent between, roasters or cafe owners, producers or whatever that probably exists out of the framework that is set up today to talk about things like, and I think what you would see is a little group of people starting to, I suppose, work together, and show, what can really happen when you do, look at it from a sustainable business model, trying to keep things with people who are in business who are really interested in, some of the aspects of that business and not just only the cash, like coffee's incredible. Like I find it so, a
Mm.
great time for coffee at the moment. I think there's going to have so many things coming out, that are going to be so interesting. Like, um, you can't lose heart because a lot of the actual core ingredients of that is really good,
But we
it
have
is.
problems that
It's
we need to come together to solve.
yeah, I think so, and I think I think it's. I would try and get people to run their businesses, in a manner that's going to help, not hinder. Easier said
When
than
I
done.
was, that's what I was going to say. When I was running Elixir and I would come to you and to Lisa and we'd sit down and we'd have a coffee and I'd be like, I just don't understand how to fix this problem. I don't know how this changes. And granted, I was doing something that was a little bit different. I was creating something that was a new category in coffee. The overwhelm that comes with being a business owner that doesn't know how to solve those kinds of problems, one of the valuable things to me is that I had somewhere to go to kind of like say what the problems were and to learn from other people and hear their ideas. I came to you. And when I hear of the idea of like a group of people coming together, that sounds like it would be an excellent way to navigate what is a year like 2025, because I know me, I got a lot of value out of having wisdom and having people who had walked that before me. And that was a kind of mentorship. But at the same time, as a business owner now, who has seen quite a lot of stuff, I want to be able to also work with peers so that we can create something that is a safe, sort of a safe environment for a lot of people to come and solve problems together.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we exist in an industry that has enough trust for that.
Maybe not, but I don't think it has to be like. I think it just needs to start. Like, yeah,
It could be a group of
like,
a few people.
yeah. But even like just incorporating aspects of, we brought Felipe out to work in our, cafe. Like, I think, all that sort of stuff still needs to happen in regards to, really looking at aspects of, us understanding what he did, or, him understanding our market. Like, I think just a little bit more of an openness. Like, I think, talking to other roasters, like realistically, I had a trip recently where, I went to Mexico and cupped with some roasters, and it was just such a beautiful time to just sit down and have a bit of a grizzle and a whinge and work out, problems and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean?
And that's what I mean. Having someone to go to say that can be almost just enough. I don't know. What's the barrier, though, for our industry? Why don't we do that?
I think we should do. I don't know. Like, it's I think it's cloaked. Like, a lot of the time. Yeah, I really don't know. Like, to me, like, if I go to a trade show, it's always so frenetic and that sort of stuff that I'm sort of getting sold so many alt milks or machinery that the real reason I'm sort of there is to connect a little bit, And I think there isn't such a great, availability of those connection points so much. Like, I do find it very frenetic, all of that. And sometimes, it's with a very, agenda. But really, what I want to do is go and cup coffees with a whole lot of peers.
Yeah.
And but in an environment where it's a little bit sort of like you can just sit down and go, and just open up a little bit, and I think that's really good. And I think across the board, roasters should be able to do that together a little bit. It's very difficult if you're in the same environment. Like when I was, when Paul and I, Russ, traveled, they were in Sydney, I was in Melbourne, there was no conflict, and even with Heath from Coffee Supreme and all those sort of things back in the day, we were sort of solving problems together a little bit, but I think we don't have that same sort of camaraderie, and I think it's COVID, and I think it's, coming out of that, and I think it's not having time or have lost that connection, all those sort of aspects, Like PCP was designed to be a little bit of that sort of approach to coffee, We were roasters. What's the one problem with that? You don't taste other people's coffee really, or you don't use it. So, okay, well, let's do this, and that would create, a bit more of a ability to interact, which it did. It was great. I really enjoyed that project.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What are the benefits in your mind? Like if we look at where this coffee crisis goes over the next 5 years, I think
Yep.
that our big problem is that if we don't come together, we end up reinventing the wheel in our own silos.
Yep.
But the next 5 years could go in a whole bunch of different directions for business owners and for the industry. What does it look like if we do find a way to come together? Not everybody has to come together all together. Some people can come together in their own little groups and solve problems. What does 5 years look like if we do that versus not doing that?
So, yeah, well, I think it's important for people to probably find, their own sort of space or whatever a little bit, because I
Right.
don't think any organization is going to build it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think,
Fuck no.
so, but I think, I think it's really good to have connections in coffee. Like, coffee is quite a small world,
Yeah.
and I think you have to be realistic and really form, some sort of, friendship group and things like that. And yeah, be able to catch up and, talk about business, but also talk about, other aspects. So yeah, I think COVID has thrown us, off a little bit, and hopefully now we actually get back into the enjoyment of what we do a little bit more, and sort of why we do it. Hopefully things will stabilize, and be a little more sort of static. Like if the sea would just stay at 350 or 3 or 4 or whatever, and just stay there and do that thing for a while, so we could all just adapt, and people were,
Right.
all over the place. I think those sort of things would be really helpful. And I think, to a certain extent, just really looking at what we want our industry to be. Like, there's a lot of questions, a lot of changes in the industry, and I think it's important to really look at those aspects.
Yeah. Okay. Next episode, we're going to talk about a juicy subject, folks. I've been asking a lot of people who come on the podcast this question, and George actually wanted to come on the podcast to argue with me about this question, which was really fun. And we're going to talk about defining quality. So join us in the next episode. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.